The dust clung to Willow Matthews' dress as she stood frozen in the doorway of the old cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs at the sight of the tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Owen Miller, the boy who had promised her the world before vanishing for 8 long years, stood not 20 paces away, his broad shoulders and familiar stance unmistakable even after all this time. "Montana Territory, 1878, you cannot simply appear like this," Willow said, her voice barely above a whisper as she gripped the worn wooden doorframe for support. "Not after all this time." Owen removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in late summer, now cut shorter than she remembered. His face had weathered into that of a man's tanned and lined around the eyes from years of squinting against the sun. But those eyes remained the same shade of striking blue that had once looked at her with such tenderness. "I know I have no right," he said, his voice deeper than in her memories. "But I had to come back, Willow, back to our place, our place." The words hung in the air between them. The cabin they had discovered as children abandoned and half-fallen, and had painstakingly rebuilt over summers and stolen afternoons. Their secret sanctuary in the foothills where they had shared dreams and first kisses and promises that she had foolishly believed. "This is my home now," she said, straightening her spine. "Not our place, not anymore. I can see that." His eyes took in the curtains at the windows, the small garden she'd coaxed from the stubborn soil, the rocking chair on the porch. "You've made it beautiful." The compliment stung worse than an insult. "What do you want, Owen?" He took a step forward, then seemed to think better of it, remaining at a respectful distance. "I want to explain. I want to tell you where I've been and why I left, and—" He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "I came to ask if you might consider building a life with me, Willow, the way we always planned." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. 8 years of silence, and you expect me to fall into your arms. The war ended long ago, Owen. Whatever kept you away after that was your choice. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you, he said quietly, of this place. And yet not a single letter found its way to me. She folded her arms across her chest, suddenly aware of her work-worn dress and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun. "My father died. My mother remarried and moved east. The town has changed. I have changed. I can see that too." His eyes softened. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered." "Stop it," she warned. "I'm not a 16-year-old girl anymore to be swayed by pretty words." "No, you're not," he agreed, his voice solemn. "You're a woman who deserves honesty. Will you at least hear what I have to say?" "Then if you want me gone, I'll respect your wishes." The sensible thing would be to send him away immediately, to close the door on the past and on the man who had broken her heart. But Willow had spent too many nights wondering, too many years imagining this moment to deny herself answers. "You can water your horse at the stream," she said finally. "I'll put on coffee." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you." As he led his horse away, Willow slipped back inside the cabin, pressing her palm against her chest where her heart continued its betraying flutter. The familiar walls suddenly seemed to close in, filled with ghosts of shared laughter and whispered promises from a lifetime ago. The coffee was nearly boiled when Owen's boots sounded on the porch steps. He ducked his head to enter, his tall frame making the cabin feel smaller than it was. He'd removed his dusty coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. A thin scar she didn't recognize ran along one wrist. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to the table she had crafted herself during that first lonely winter. He obeyed, removing his hat and placing it beside him. Willow poured 2 cups of coffee, then sat across from him, maintaining as much distance as the small table allowed. "Say what you came to say," she told him, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. Owen stared into his coffee for a long moment before meeting her eyes. "I joined up like I told you I would, made it to Fort Laramie for training, then got sent east with my regiment, but our transport was ambushed. I took a bullet to the shoulder, another to the leg." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if reciting someone else's story. "By the time I recovered enough to write, we'd heard that Willow Creek had been raided. The report said there were no survivors." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter on her tongue. Willow Creek wasn't raided. There was a fire at the mill that spread to some of the buildings, but I know that now, he interrupted gently. But then all I had was the report. I thought you were dead, Willow. For nearly 3 years I believed I'd lost you. She set down her cup. And when did you discover otherwise? I ran into Samuel Jenkins in Denver. He told me you'd moved up here to your grandparents' old place after your father passed. Owen's eyes never left her face. I couldn't believe it. I nearly knocked poor Sam over demanding details. And that was when Owen had the grace to look ashamed. Almost 5 years ago, the hurt she'd been holding at bay rushed back with renewed force. 5 years, Owen. You knew I was alive for 5 years and stayed away. I wasn't fit to come back to you, he said, his voice rough. The war, it changed me. I was angry, broken. I couldn't sleep without nightmares, couldn't be around crowds without panicking. He flexed his hand on the table. I started drinking too much, got into fights, drifted from town to town, taking whatever work I could find. So what changed? She challenged. Why now? I met an old cavalry doctor in Wyoming. He'd seen men like me before, helped them find their way back. Took me nearly 2 years working at his ranch before I started feeling human again. Owen's gaze dropped to his coffee. And even then, I was afraid you'd built a new life. Afraid you'd married. I almost did, she admitted, watching the flicker of pain cross his face with grim satisfaction. Thomas Barnes asked me last spring. He's the school teacher now. Why didn't you? Owen asked quietly. Willow looked away. He wasn't you, she whispered, hating herself for the admission. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters Willow had installed herself. I should have written when I learned you were alive, Owen finally said. There's no excuse for that. I convinced myself I was protecting you by staying away. The truth is, I was protecting myself from facing what I'd become. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I don't expect your forgiveness, Willow, but I needed you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. The words she had longed to hear for so many years now threatened to unravel her carefully constructed defenses. Willow stood abruptly, needing distance. It's getting late. You should go. Owen nodded, accepting her dismissal without argument. He rose and retrieved his hat. Could I come back tomorrow? There's more I'd like to say if you're willing to listen. She should refuse, send him away permanently and return to the life she'd built without him. But the thought of watching him ride away again, perhaps forever this time, made her chest constrict painfully. I'll be working in the garden in the morning, she said, not quite an invitation, but not a rejection either. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Thank you, Willow. When he was gone, Willow sat in her rocking chair until the stars emerged, her mind replaying every word, every expression. Sleep eluded her that night, memories surfacing like bubbles in a stream, Owen teaching her to skip stones across the creek when they were children. The summer they found the abandoned cabin and claimed it as their own. The first time he kissed her beneath the old cottonwood tree, the plans they'd made for a future together before war called him away. Dawn found her bleary-eyed but resolved. She would hear him out and then she would decide. She owed herself that much. The morning air carried the scent of pine and earth as Willow worked in her garden, pulling weeds from between rows of vegetables. She had chosen practical plants: potatoes, carrots, beans, but had indulged herself with a small patch of wildflowers that reminded her of the bouquets Owen used to bring her. She heard his approach before she saw him, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats growing louder. Straightening, she brushed soil from her apron and watched as he guided his horse along the narrow path to her cabin. Today he wore a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. In his hand was a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Good morning, he called, dismounting with the easy grace that had always been natural to him. He tethered his horse to the hitching post she'd installed and approached, extending the package. I brought coffee beans from town, thought you might be running low. The thoughtful gesture irritated her irrationally. I don't need charity, Owen. Not charity, he corrected gently, just a neighbor being neighborly. Is that what we are now, neighbors? We're whatever you want us to be, Willow. The simple honesty in his voice disarmed her. She accepted the package. "Thank you, may I help?" he asked, nodding toward the garden. Willow considered refusing, but the truth was, the work would go faster with an extra pair of hands. "If you'd like." They worked side by side, pulling weeds and turning soil for new plantings. The familiar rhythm of shared labor gradually eased the tension between them. "You've done well with this place," Owen commented, wiping sweat from his brow. "I remember when it was just a tumble-down shack." "We were going to fix it up together," she reminded him, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Yes, we were." He paused, his hands stilling in the earth. "I never forgot our plans, Willow. Even when I thought you were gone, I could close my eyes and see exactly how we wanted it to look." "It's different than what we planned," she said. "I made it my own. That's as it should be." His gaze traveled over the cabin, taking in the expanded porch, the new roof, the stone chimney. "Though I see you built the fireplace exactly where we marked it." She had, despite telling herself it was simply the most practical location. "The winters are cold up here. Do you have enough firewood for the coming season?" he asked, practical concern replacing sentimentality. "I manage." "I could help with that too," he offered carefully. "No strings attached, Willow, just—" He hesitated. "Just let me do this for you." The stubborn pride that had sustained her through years of solitude warred with practicality. Cutting and stacking enough wood for Montana's brutal winters was backbreaking work, and she'd been dreading the task. "Why are you really here, Owen?" she asked directly. "After all this time, why come back now?" He sat back on his heels, dirt smudging his forearms. "I told you yesterday I came to see if there's any chance you might consider building a life with me. And if I say no." Pain flashed across his features, but he nodded. "Then I'll respect that, but I'd still like to help with your wood supply before I go." The simple declaration held no manipulation, no pressure, just an honest offer of assistance regardless of her answer to his larger question. "The tools are in the shed," she said finally. They worked through the morning, Willow tending her garden while Owen began the process of cutting logs into manageable sections. The steady rhythm of the axe filled the air, a sound that had been absent from her homestead since her father's visit the previous fall. When the sun reached its zenith, Willow prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. She called Owen to the porch, where they ate in companionable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "How have you supported yourself all these years?" he asked eventually. "This is a lot for one person to maintain." "I sell preserves and remedies in town," she explained. "My grandmother taught me about plants and their uses. There's good money in it, especially in winter when folks get sick." "You always did have a knack for healing," he remembered. "Remember when you fixed my sprained ankle with that poultice?" The memory surfaced unbidden. 14-year-old Owen, grimacing in pain after a fall from a tree, 12-year-old Willow, solemnly applying the mixture her grandmother had taught her to prepare. "You were a terrible patient," she recalled, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "Insisted on walking on it the very next day. And you scolded me something fierce." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, new lines mapping the passing years. The moment of shared remembrance hung between them, a fragile thread connecting past to present. Then Willow stood, gathering the remnants of their meal. "I need to check my traps," she said. "Feel free to continue with the wood if you'd like." She left him on the porch and retrieved her rifle from inside. When she emerged, Owen was back at the woodpile, his sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening his shirt between his shoulder blades. "I won't be long," she called. He nodded, lifting a hand in acknowledgement, and then she was moving into the shelter of the trees, following the familiar path that led deeper into the forest. The traps yielded 2 rabbits, which Willow dispatched efficiently before resetting them. As she walked back toward the cabin, the steady rhythm of Owen's axe guided her home like a beacon. Home. The word caught her off guard. For years, the cabin had been her sanctuary, her hard-won independence. Yet in just one day, Owen's presence had shifted something fundamental, making it feel both more alive and more unsettled. When she emerged from the trees, the sight that greeted her made her steps falter. Owen had stacked an impressive amount of wood against the side of the cabin, the neat rows nearly reaching the roofline. He was speaking to someone, a man on horseback whose back was to Willow. As she approached, the visitor turned and Willow recognized Thomas Barnes, the schoolteacher whose proposal she had declined just months earlier. "Afternoon, Miss Matthews," Thomas called, his usually friendly voice carrying an edge. "I was just telling Mr. Miller here that I hadn't realized you were expecting company." "I wasn't," Willow replied, coming to stand beside the two men. "Owen arrived yesterday." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly as they shifted between her and Owen. "I see. Well, I just stopped by to bring you those books we discussed for your garden planning." He produced a small package from his saddlebag, extending it toward her with a stiff smile. "That's very kind, Thomas, thank you." She accepted the books, acutely aware of Owen's observant silence beside her. "Will you be staying long, Mr. Miller?" Thomas asked, not bothering to mask the challenge in his tone. Owen straightened to his full height, several inches taller than the schoolteacher. "That depends on Miss Matthews," he replied evenly. The tension crackled between the men like static before a storm. Willow cleared her throat. "Thomas, would you care to stay for tea?" "Thank you, no," he declined, already turning his horse. "I should return to town before dark. Good day to you, Miss Matthews." He nodded curtly at Owen. "Miller." They watched him ride away, dust trailing behind his horse down the narrow path. "Friend of yours?" Owen asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes," Willow answered simply. "He's been kind to me." "I'm glad," Owen said, surprising her. "Glad you weren't alone all this time." The sincerity in his voice confused her. She had expected jealousy, perhaps even possessiveness, not this mature acceptance. "He wanted more than friendship," she admitted, testing his reaction. "I gathered as much." Owen turned back to the woodpile, lifting another log. "Can't say I blame him." "You're not bothered by that." The axe came down with precision, splitting the log cleanly. "I have no right to be bothered by anything regarding your life these past 8 years, Willow. I forfeited that right when I stayed away." He set up another log. "Though I can't pretend I'm not relieved you turned him down." She watched him work for a moment, the muscles in his arms flexing with each swing of the axe. He was different from the boy who had left harder in some ways, more thoughtful in others. "I'm going to prepare these rabbits for stew," she said finally. "You're welcome to stay for supper if you'd like." He paused mid-swing, looking over his shoulder at her. "I'd like that very much." Willow nodded and retreated to the cabin, grateful for the familiar task that would occupy her hands while her mind tried to make sense of the emotions swirling within her. The rabbit stew simmered over the fire, filling the cabin with savory aromas as the afternoon waned into evening. Outside, Owen continued working until Willow called him in. He washed at the basin on the porch, the golden light of sunset highlighting the strong lines of his profile as he dried his face and hands. Inside, he looked around more carefully than he had the previous day, taking in the details of the home she had created. His gaze lingered on the quilt draped over her bed in the corner, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Your mother's pattern," he said softly. "You finished it." She nodded, stirring the stew. "During that first winter here, it helped to have something of hers with me. It's beautiful." His eyes moved to a small shelf where she kept a few treasured items: a carved wooden horse her father had made, her mother's worn Bible, a smooth river stone with a natural hole through its center. He stepped closer, his breath catching. "You kept it." The stone had been his gift to her on her 16th birthday. A wishing stone, he had called it, telling her that anything she whispered through the hole would surely come true. "Yes," she admitted, unable to explain why she had held onto this small token when she had discarded so many other reminders of him. Owen didn't touch the stone, merely gazed at it with an expression of wonder tinged with regret. "Did you ever make a wish?" "Many," she answered truthfully. "Though they didn't come true," the words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Owen turned from the shelf, his eyes finding hers across the small room. "I'm sorry, Willow, more than I can ever express. I know." And somehow she did. Whatever his failings, whatever pain his absence had caused her, she believed in his regret. They ate by lamplight, the stew hearty and flavorful. Owen praised her cooking, and they spoke of safer topics: the changing weather, news from town, the wild Mustang herd that sometimes passed through the valley below. "You remember when we tried to catch that dun colt?" Owen asked, smiling at the memory. "You were so determined." "We almost had him," Willow recalled. "If your lasso had been a foot longer, it wouldn't have mattered. That horse was too smart for us." Owen's expression grew reflective. "I ended up with a horse just like him, though, in Wyoming, same coloring, same stubborn spirit." "What was his name?" "Chance." Owen's lips quirked. "Because that's what he gave me, a second chance when I was at my lowest." Willow found herself leaning forward, drawn into his story despite her reservations. "What happened?" Owen set down his spoon, his eyes distant with memory. "I was working as a ranch hand, still drinking too much most nights. One evening, a wildfire broke out in the foothills. The hands all rode out to help move the cattle, but I was—" He looked down. "I was passed out behind the bunkhouse. By the time I came to, everyone was gone." He took a breath. "I saddled up anyway, figured I'd catch up. Rode straight into the worst of it, disoriented and half drunk still. Got myself trapped between the fire line and a ravine. My horse panicked, threw me, and bolted." Willow's hand had unconsciously moved to her throat. "How did you escape?" "That dun Mustang appeared out of nowhere like a ghost through the smoke, just standing there watching me. I managed to get on his back, and he knew exactly where to go, found a path through the flames I never would have seen." Owen shook his head in wonder. "Led me straight to safety, then to the ranch. The old doctor took one look at me covered in soot, sobering up fast, and riding a wild Mustang like we'd been partners for years, and he just said, 'Looks like you've been given a chance, son. What are you going to do with it?' And what did you do?" Willow asked softly. "Stopped drinking that night, started working honestly with the doctor, talking about the war, about what I'd seen and done." Owen met her eyes. "About you and how I'd failed you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Willow found herself believing him, and that belief was both comforting and terrifying. "It's getting late," she said, rising to clear their bowls. "You should head back to town before full dark." Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Of course." He stood, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for supper and for listening." At the door, he paused. "Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? There's still plenty of wood to cut, and I noticed your north fence needs mending." She should refuse. Should thank him for his help and send him on his way permanently. Instead, she heard herself say, "The fence can wait, but if you want to continue with the wood, I won't stop you." The smile that lit his face made him look like the boy she had once loved so desperately. "I'll be here at first light," he promised. When he was gone, Willow stood in the doorway watching until his silhouette disappeared into the gathering darkness. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the dangerous hope that had taken root in her heart. True to his word, Owen returned at dawn the next day and the day after that. They fell into an unexpected rhythm. He would work outside while she tended to her garden and preparations for winter. Then they would share the midday meal. Sometimes they would work together in the afternoon, their bodies remembering the synchronized patterns of youth as they tackled repairs around the cabin. In the evenings, he would ride back to town, where he had taken a room above the general store. Each departure was marked by a moment of hesitation, as if he wanted to say more, ask more. But he never did, respecting the boundaries she had established. A week passed this way, then another. The woodpile grew, the fence was mended, the cabin received a fresh coat of sealant against the coming winter. With each task completed, Willow found herself inventing new ones, unwilling to acknowledge that she was deliberately prolonging his stay. They spoke of many things during those days: his travels, her life in the cabin, memories both shared and separate. Gradually, the weight of their past lightened, making space for something new to grow. On a particularly warm afternoon, they walked down to the creek that ran behind the cabin. Owen had offered to help her gather mint that grew wild along its banks for her remedies. The familiar path through the pines brought back a flood of memories. They had walked this way countless times as children, then as young lovers. "It hasn't changed much," Owen observed, squinting up at the sunlight filtering through the branches. No, Willow agreed. It's one of the things I love about this place. The seasons turn, but the land remains constant. They reach the creek, its clear water burbling over smooth stones. Willow knelt at the edge, pointing out the mint patches. Owen rolled up his sleeves and joined her, carefully harvesting the fragrant leaves as she instructed. "You've become quite the healer," he commented, watching as she expertly selected the best specimens. "The folks in town speak highly of your remedies. It's my grandmother's legacy," she explained. "She used to say that God put the cure for every ailment right in the soil if only we had eyes to see it. Wise woman." Owen's hands worked steadily alongside hers. "Do you remember teaching me which berries were safe to eat?" Willow smiled at the memory. "You were convinced the bright red ones would taste the best. And you saved me from a terrible stomachache," he chuckled. "You were always the sensible one." "Not always," she murmured, thinking of how recklessly she had given her heart to him. Owen seemed to read her thoughts, his hand stilled beside hers in the mint patch. "I don't expect you to trust me again, Willow. I know trust is earned, not given." He met her eyes directly. "But I hope you'll give me the chance to earn it." The sincerity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Why now, Owen? After all these years, why come back now?" He sat back on his heels, considering her question seriously. "I told myself I needed to be whole again before I returned. To be the man you deserved, not the broken shell I'd become." He shook his head. "But the truth is simpler than that. I was afraid you'd moved on, afraid you'd look at me the way you did that first day, like I was a ghost who had no right to disturb your peace. And now you're not afraid." "Oh, I'm still terrified," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I finally realized that I was more afraid of never trying at all, of never knowing if we might still have a chance." He reached for a mint leaf, rolling it between his fingers and releasing its sharp, clean scent. "When my mother passed last spring, it hit me that life is too short for regrets, and my biggest regret was leaving you." "Your mother died," Willow hadn't known. "I'm sorry, Owen, thank you." He looked down at the mint in his hand. "She asked about you near the end. Wanted to know if I'd ever made things right with that sweet Matthews girl." His voice roughened with emotion. "I had to tell her no," the disappointment in her eyes. He shook his head. "That was the moment I knew I had to find you, even if just to say a proper goodbye." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Willow found herself reaching across the small space that separated them, her fingers brushing his. "I would have liked to say goodbye to her. She was always kind to me." Owen turned his hand, capturing her fingers gently in his. "She loved you like a daughter already." The simple touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. For a moment they remained connected, the babbling creek and rustling leaves the only sounds around them. Willow was the first to pull away, returning to her task with slightly unsteady hands. "We should finish before the sun gets too low." They worked in companionable silence after that, filling her basket with mint and other herbs that grew along the creek bank. As they started back toward the cabin, the sky darkened unexpectedly, heavy clouds rolling in from the mountains. "Storm's coming," Owen observed, glancing at the rapidly changing sky. "Looks like a big one," Willow nodded, quickening her pace. "We need to secure everything before it hits." They rushed back to the cabin, working together to bring in the wash from the line, cover the garden's more delicate plants, and ensure the livestock Willow's 2 goats and small flock of chickens were safely in their shelters. The wind picked up as they worked, whipping Willow's skirts around her legs and tugging strands of hair from her bun. They had just finished when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a downpour. They dashed for the cabin's porch, laughing breathlessly as they escaped the worst of it. "That came on fast," Willow said, pushing wet hair from her face. Owen nodded, water dripping from his hat brim. "Too dangerous to ride back to town in this," he observed, looking at the sheets of rain now obscuring the path. "If you don't mind, I should probably wait it out." Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the cabin's timbers. One of the goats bleated in alarm from the nearby shed. "Of course," Willow agreed. "Come inside before you catch your death." The cabin felt different with Owen inside as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled overhead, smaller, more intimate. Willow busied herself lighting lamps against the premature darkness while Owen removed his wet coat and hat, hanging them by the door. "Your shirt's soaked through," she observed, noticing how the fabric clung to his shoulders. "I might have something of my father's that would fit you." She rummaged in a trunk and produced a simple flannel shirt, worn but clean. "Here, you can change behind the screen." She nodded toward the privacy screen in the corner that shielded her washing area. When Owen emerged, the sight of him in her father's shirt caused an unexpected pang in her chest. The garment was slightly too small across his broader shoulders, but the familiar pattern against his unfamiliar form created a strange juxtaposition of past and present. "Thank you," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. "That's much better." Willow turned away, suddenly flustered. "I'll make tea to warm us." She busied herself at the stove, grateful for the task that required her attention. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain hammering against the roof and wind howling around the cabin's corners. "Your repairs are holding well," Owen commented, listening to the elements testing the cabin's strength. "Not a single leak." "I've had practice," she replied, pouring hot water over tea leaves. "The first winter here, I woke up to snow on my quilt more than once before I got the roof properly fixed." She brought 2 steaming cups to the table, and they sat across from each other, the lamplight casting a warm glow against the storm's fury outside. "It must have been hard," Owen said quietly, "being here alone." Willow cupped her hands around the warm mug. "It was at first, but there's a certain peace in solitude once you grow accustomed to it. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint. Or to be disappointed by," he added perceptively. She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "Yes." A particularly violent gust rattled the shutters, making them both glance toward the window. The rain showed no signs of abating. "Looks like you might be stuck here for a while," Willow observed. "I can sleep in the shed with the goats if it makes you uncomfortable having me here," Owen offered seriously. The image of him bedded down with her cantankerous old goats made her laugh despite herself. "That won't be necessary. You can take the chair by the fire." Relief crossed his features. "Thank you." As the evening deepened and the storm continued, they shared a simple supper of cornbread and beans. The familiar domesticity of the scene stirred something in Willow's heart, a longing she had tried to bury beneath years of self-sufficiency. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said as they sat by the fire afterward, the rain creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. "What was it like?" Owen settled more comfortably in his chair, stretching his long legs toward the warmth of the flames. "Beautiful in a stark way. Not as green as here, but the sky seems bigger somehow. You can see forever across the plains." "And the doctor who helped you, what was he like?" "Dr. Harrison," Owen smiled at the memory. "Ornery as an old mule and twice as stubborn. Fought in the Mexican War, then studied medicine back east. Came west when his wife died and built a place for himself, treating everyone from ranch hands to Cheyenne hunters." His expression grew thoughtful. He didn't believe in coddling his patients. "Said the body heals itself if given half a chance, and the mind can too if you face your demons instead of drowning them. Sounds like a wise man." He was. Owen's gaze was distant, reflecting the dancing flames. "Taught me that strength isn't about never breaking, but about how you put yourself back together." He looked directly at Willow. "I wish I'd understood that sooner. I thought I needed to be completely healed before coming back to you, but Harrison helped me see that healing happens in the living, in the trying each day to be better than you were the day before." The honest vulnerability in his words touched something deep within her. "And are you?" "Better than you were, I hope so," he said simply. "I work at it every day." Thunder rumbled overhead closer now, and rain continued to lash against the windows. The storm's persistence had created a pocket of time outside the normal flow, a space where honesty seemed not only possible but necessary. "I used to hate you," Willow admitted, her voice soft but clear. "After the waiting and the not knowing. I convinced myself that you'd found someone else, or that you'd never really loved me at all." Owen flinched but didn't look away. "I deserved your hatred." "No," she said, surprising herself with the realization. "You deserved my anger, perhaps. but hatred serves no purpose except to poison the one who carries it. She traced the rim of her empty cup with one finger. Eventually, I had to let it go just to survive. And now, he asked, the question hanging between them like a fragile thread. Willow stared into the fire, searching her heart for the truth. Now I don't know what I feel, she answered honestly. When you first appeared, it was like seeing a ghost. Now you're here in my home, wearing my father's shirt, and she faltered. I don't know how to reconcile the boy I loved with the man sitting before me. They're one and the same, Owen said quietly. Older maybe, a little wiser, I hope. But my heart is unchanged in one respect. It's always been yours, Willow, even when I had no right to give it. The declaration hung in the air between them, sincere and undemanding. Outside, the storm began to abate, the space between thunderclaps lengthening as the rain gentled to a steady patter. It's late, Willow said finally, rising from her chair. We should get some rest. She prepared the chair for him with a pillow and blanket, then retreated behind her screen to change into her nightgown. When she emerged, Owen was standing by the window, watching the rain, his profile outlined by the fading firelight. He turned at her approach, his expression softening at the sight of her with her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment they stood in silence, the years between them both a vast chasm and a paper-thin barrier. "Good night, Owen," she said softly. "Good night, Willow," he replied, his voice equally gentle. "Thank you for sheltering me from the storm." She slipped into her bed as he settled into the chair, pulling the blanket over himself. The familiar sounds of the cabin, the crackling fire, the ticking of the small clock on the mantel, the gentle patter of rain on the roof were joined by the new rhythm of another person's breathing. It should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt strangely right. Willow lay awake long after Owen's breathing had deepened into sleep, watching the play of firelight on the ceiling and wondering if, perhaps, there were some storms from which neither of them needed shelter any longer. She woke to the aroma of coffee and the quiet sounds of movement. Opening her eyes, she found Owen already dressed and tending the fire, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Hope I didn't wake you. Thought I'd get the fire going before the cabin got too cold." Willow sat up, pulling her quilt around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Thank you." "The storm passed in the night," he told her, pouring coffee into a cup. "But it left quite a mess behind, tree down across your south field and the creeks overflowing its banks." He brought the coffee to her, setting it on the small table beside her bed. The simple domesticity of the gesture made her heart twist with a longing she had thought long buried. "I should dress," she said, suddenly self-conscious in her nightgown with her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. Owen nodded, turning away to give her privacy. "I'll check on the animals while you do." When he had gone, Willow dressed quickly, pinning her hair in its usual practical bun. By the time Owen returned, she had composed herself, though the sight of him in the doorway, hair tousled by the wind, her father's shirt stretched across his shoulders, still caused her pulse to quicken traitorously. "Goats are fine, if a bit grumpy about the wet," he reported. "Chickens, too. But that fallen tree needs attention before it damages your fence line." They shared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and the last of Willow's preserved peaches, then set out to survey the storm's damage. The morning air was washed clean, the sky a brilliant blue above them as they walked the property together. The fallen tree was a large pine that had stood at the edge of Willow's southern field. Now it lay across her fence, its massive root system torn from the saturated ground. "We'll need the saw," Owen observed, studying the tree, "and probably an extra pair of hands for the larger sections." "I can ask Thomas," Willow suggested. "He's helped me with similar problems before." A shadow crossed Owen's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Of course," he said evenly. "Though I'd be happy to ride into town and see if anyone else is available, might be faster." "That would be helpful," she agreed. "Thomas is likely busy with the school anyway." While Owen rode to town, Willow gathered tools and assessed the rest of the damage. The creek had indeed risen, flooding part of the lower field, but the cabin and outbuildings had weathered the storm well. By the time Owen returned with 2 ranch hands from the neighboring property, she had cleared smaller debris and marked sections of the tree for cutting. The men worked through the morning, cutting the massive trunk into manageable pieces and dragging them clear of the fence line. Willow worked alongside them, helping where she could and providing water when they paused to rest. By midday, the fence was repaired and the trees sectioned into firewood, an unexpected bounty from the storm's destruction. "That should keep your hearth warm all winter," one of the ranch hands commented as they prepared to depart. "I'm grateful for your help," Willow told them, pressing a jar of her honey into each man's hands as payment. When they had gone, she and Owen stood surveying their accomplishment, satisfaction in their shared labor evident on both their faces. "Quite a team, aren't we?" Owen observed, a hint of wistfulness in his tone. "We always were," Willow admitted before she could stop herself. His eyes found hers, hope kindling in their blue depths. "We could be again," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Then Willow turned away, suddenly overwhelmed by the emotions threatening to surface. "I should check the creek," she said, already moving toward the path that led down to the water. Owen fell into step beside her, respecting her unspoken need for space by maintaining a careful distance between them. They walked in silence, the only sounds the squelch of mud beneath their boots and the increasingly loud rush of the swollen creek. When they reached the bank, Willow gasped. The usually gentle stream had transformed into a churning torrent, brown with silt and debris. It had already eroded part of the bank near the bend that curved toward her property. "If it rises any further, it could threaten the cabin's foundation," Owen observed, concern evident in his voice. Willow nodded grimly. "It happened once before, 3 winters ago. I had to divert part of the flow with a series of barriers." "Show me where," Owen said immediately. "We should start now before it gets worse." They spent the remainder of the day constructing makeshift dams of rock and fallen timber, strategically placed to direct the water away from the vulnerable section of bank near the cabin. It was exhausting, muddy work, but they fell into a rhythm together, anticipating each other's needs with a synchronicity that spoke of their shared past. As the sun began to set, they stood side by side, soaked and mud-spattered but satisfied with their efforts. The creek still raged, but now its fury was channeled safely away from Willow's home. "Thank you," she said simply. Too tired for more elaborate expressions of gratitude, Owen nodded, equally exhausted. "Let's get back before we lose the light completely." At the cabin, they took turns washing away the day's grime at the basin on the porch. Willow changed behind her screen while Owen built up the fire against the evening chill. When she emerged in a clean dress, her damp hair braided down her back, he had already set water to boil for tea. "Your turn to clean up," she told him, taking over at the stove. "There's fresh water in the basin, and I've set out another of my father's shirts." When Owen returned, face scrubbed and hair damp, Willow had prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans with the last of the rabbit from their previous meal. They ate in companionable silence, too tired for conversation but comfortable in each other's presence. After they had eaten, Owen rose to leave, reaching for his hat. "I should get back to town before full dark." Willow found herself reluctant to see him go. "The path will be muddy and treacherous after the rain," she said. "Perhaps you should stay again." Surprise registered on his face, followed by a careful neutrality. "If you're certain—" "I am," she confirmed, surprised by her own certainty. "The chair by the fire isn't much, but it's better than risking your neck on those slippery trails." "Thank you," he said simply. As they settled in for the evening, Willow took up her mending while Owen cleaned and oiled her tools that had been exposed to the elements during their work. The quiet domesticity of the scene stirred something deep within her, a recognition of what might have been, what still could be. "Owen," she said suddenly, setting aside her sewing, "why did you really come back?" He looked up from his task, his hands stilling on the saw he had been wiping down. "I told you, to see if there was any chance for us. But why now, after all these years?" Owen set the saw aside carefully, giving her question the consideration it deserved. Partly because of my mother's passing, as I mentioned, but there's more to it. He met her eyes directly. I had a dream about 3 months ago, so vivid it felt like more than a dream. We were here in this cabin, but it was different. There were children's toys scattered about, a cradle in the corner. You were standing at the stove, humming that tune your mother always sang. Willow's breath caught at the unexpected detail. She could almost hear the gentle melody her mother had hummed while working. When I woke up, Owen continued, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. That dream showed me everything I'd lost through my own fear and pride. Everything we might still have if only I found the courage to face you. His gaze was steady, vulnerable in its honesty. So I settled my affairs in Wyoming and came east, took odd jobs along the way to pay for the journey. Reached Willow Creek 2 weeks ago and learned from the storekeeper that you were living up here alone. And you came straight here. Not immediately, he admitted. I spent several days preparing what I would say to you, practiced it over and over. A rueful smile touched his lips. Then forgot every word the moment I saw you standing in that doorway. The simple honesty of his account touched Willow deeply. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate excuses, just the truth of a man who had finally found the courage to face his greatest regret. I spent years imagining what I would say if I ever saw you again, she confessed. All the accusations I would hurl, all the pain I would make you feel. She shook her head slowly. But when you appeared, all those carefully prepared words vanished. All I felt was relief. The admission surprised her even as she spoke it. Relief that you were alive, that I could finally stop wondering. I never meant to leave you wondering, Owen said quietly. That was cruel, even if unintentional. Yes, it was, she agreed, the old hurt surfacing briefly before subsiding again. But I understand better now. Not just why you stayed away, but why I needed to be on my own these years. She gestured to the cabin around them. I built this life, Owen, with my own hands, my own strength. I needed to know I could do that. You always were the strongest person I knew, he said with genuine admiration. Even when we were children. Remember when Billy Jenkins said girls couldn't climb to the top branch of the old oak, and you proved him wrong before he could even finish his taunt. The memory brought a smile to her lips. I tore my dress and earned a switching from my mother for that adventure, but you never regretted it, Owen recalled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Said it was worth it to see the look on Billy's face. It was, she laughed softly. Though I was more careful with my dresses after that. They shared a smile, the years between them momentarily bridged by shared remembrance. Outside, an owl hooted, reminding them of the late hour. We should rest, Willow said, rising from her chair. There's still work to be done tomorrow. As she prepared for bed behind her screen, Willow found herself contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been resigned to solitude, convinced that her heart had hardened beyond the possibility of love. Now Owen was here, sleeping beside her hearth for the second night, and each hour in his presence seemed to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. She emerged to find him already settled in the chair, blanket drawn up to his chest, firelight playing across his features. Their eyes met across the dimly lit room, and something unspoken passed between them, not quite forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. Good night, Owen, she said softly. Sweet dreams, Willow, he replied, an echo of what he used to say when they parted as young lovers. She slipped beneath her quilt, listening to the familiar sounds of her cabin now accompanied by his steady breathing. Just before sleep claimed her, a realization surfaced in her mind. For the first time in 8 years, she felt truly at home. The days that followed settled into a pattern. Owen would ride to town each morning and return to help with the ongoing work around Willow's property. Together they reinforced the creek barriers, repaired storm damage to the roof, and prepared the garden for the coming cold season. In the evenings, he would stay for supper before returning to his room in town, except on the nights when weather or late work made the journey impractical. On those nights, Willow found herself looking forward to the quiet hours by the fire, when conversation flowed more freely between them. They spoke of the intervening years, her struggle to establish herself after her father's death, his wanderings across the territories. Gradually, the raw edges of their separation smoothed, allowing room for new understanding to grow. One evening, as October painted the surrounding forests in crimson and gold, Owen arrived with a small wooden crate in his arms. "A package came for you," he explained, setting it carefully on her table. "Station master asked if I'd bring it up since I was heading this way." Willow examined the crate with curiosity. "It must be from my mother. She mentioned sending preserves from back east." She pried open the lid to reveal several jars nestled in straw plum preserves, apple butter, and pickled peaches, along with a letter in her mother's elegant hand. As she read, a small smile played across her lips. "Good news?" Owen inquired, hanging his hat by the door. "My mother is well," Willow replied. "Her rheumatism is better in the Virginia climate, and—" she hesitated. "She's thinking of visiting next spring." Owen nodded, understanding the implications. "She doesn't know I'm here." "No," Willow refolded the letter carefully. "There's been no reason to mention it in my letters." The unspoken question hung between them. Would he still be here by spring? Would there be anything to tell? "Your mother always liked me," Owen said lightly, though his eyes were serious. "At least, she did before I disappeared and broke her daughter's heart." "She did," Willow acknowledged, "though she might be less welcoming now." "I'd deserve her censure," he admitted. "But I'd face it gladly for the chance to make things right with you both." The simple declaration held no artifice, no manipulation, just honest intent. Willow found herself believing him, and that belief both comforted and terrified her. "Would you like to try the plum preserves?" she asked, deliberately changing the subject. "My mother's recipe was always your favorite." They shared bread and preserves by the fire that evening, the sweet tart flavor evoking memories of summers long past, when they would steal jars from Willow's mother's pantry for picnics by the creek. "It tastes like childhood," Owen observed, savoring a bite. "Like innocence. We were so young," Willow mused, watching the fire dance in the hearth, "so certain of everything." "I was certain of you," he said quietly. "That never changed even when everything else did." The words hung in the air between them, honest and undemanding. Willow found herself wanting to believe them, wanting to trust again despite the scars of the past. "It's getting late," she said finally, rising from her chair. "You should head back before the moon sets." Owen nodded, accepting her implicit dismissal without protest. At the door he paused, hat in hand. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Winter's coming on fast. There's still so much to prepare before the first snow." "Yes," she agreed, unsure where he was leading. "It might be more practical if I stayed here," he suggested, his tone deliberately casual. "In the shed, I mean. Save the daily ride back and forth, give us more daylight hours for work." Willow considered the proposal. The practical merits were undeniable. The days were growing shorter, and there was indeed much to be done before winter set in. But the implications of having Owen living on her property, even in the outbuilding, stirred a complex mix of emotions. "The shed gets bitterly cold at night," she said finally, "and the roof leaks in the northwest corner." "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her, "and I can fix the roof easily enough." She studied his face, searching for ulterior motives but finding only sincere practicality. "Very well," she decided, "but only until the winter preparations are complete." Relief and something like happiness brightened his features. "Thank you, Willow. I'll bring my things tomorrow if that suits you." After he had gone, Willow sat by the dying fire, contemplating the changes that had swept through her carefully ordered life in the span of a few short weeks. She had gone from solitude to sharing daily meals with the man who had once broken her heart. Now he would be living on her property, separated from her only by a few yards of autumn crisp air. The thought should have alarmed her. Instead, she found herself anticipating the morning with an eagerness that felt dangerously like hope. Owen arrived the next day with his few possessions, a bedroll, spare clothing, and tools of his own that complemented her collection. He set about making the shed habitable, patching the roof and clearing space among her stored garden implements for his simple bed. Their days took on a new rhythm. They would breakfast together in the cabin, then work side by side until dusk drew them back inside for the evening meal. After supper, Owen would retire to the shed, leaving Willow to the solitude of her cabin, yet somehow, knowing he was just across the yard made the night hours feel less lonely than they had in years. The first snow came earlier than expected, dusting the mountains in late October and working its way down to Willow's Valley within days. They awoke one morning to find the world transformed, every branch, every fence post capped with white, the familiar landscape rendered new and magical. Willow stood on her porch, breath fogging in the crisp air when Owen emerged from the shed. He paused at the sight of her, silhouetted against the cabin door with snowflakes catching in her hair. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still, cold air. "Yes," she agreed, her eyes taking in the transformed landscape. "Though it means we'll need to hurry with the last of the winterizing." They spent the day securing the animals' shelters against the cold and harvesting the last hardy vegetables from the garden before the ground froze completely. By afternoon, the light snow had melted in the sun, but the chill remained a harbinger of the winter to come. As they worked, Willow found herself studying Owen when he wasn't looking, the confident set of his shoulders as he repaired the goat pen, the careful precision of his hands as he helped her preserve the last of the garden's bounty. He had changed from the impetuous boy she had loved, become more patient, more thoughtful. Yet glimpses of that boy remained in his laugh, in the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Owen pulled a small package from his pocket. "I have something for you," he said, extending it toward her. "An early winter gift." Curious, Willow unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small wooden carving, a bird with outstretched wings, exquisitely detailed despite its tiny size. "A wren," she said softly, recognizing the little songbird that had nested near the cabin each spring. "I've been working on it in the evenings," Owen explained. "Noticed how you always smile when they return each year." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. That he had observed this small joy in her life, had taken time to create something that acknowledged it, spoke volumes about his attentiveness. "It's beautiful," she said, turning the carving to admire the delicate feathers he had somehow coaxed from the wood. "Thank you, Owen. You're welcome." His voice was warm with pleasure at her approval. "It's been good being here these past weeks, working alongside you again." He hesitated, then added softly, "Feels like coming home." The words hung in the air between them, honest and undemanding. Willow found herself unable to respond, her emotions too tangled to untangle in that moment. Owen seemed to understand. He rose from his chair, reaching for his coat. "I should let you rest. Morning comes early." At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart twist in her chest. "Good night, Willow." "Good night," she replied, the small carving still cradled in her palm. After he had gone, she sat by the fire for a long time, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the wren's wings, remembering the feel of Owen's hands holding hers when they were young, and believed that love was as simple as making promises beneath summer stars. The next morning broke clear and cold, the night's frost etching delicate patterns on the windows. Willow was at the stove preparing breakfast when a knock at the door announced Owen's arrival. "Morning," he greeted, stamping snow from his boots before entering. "Creek's starting to ice over at the edges. Winter's coming on fast this year." "Then we'd best be prepared," Willow replied, setting plates on the table. "I thought we might make a trip into town today for the last supplies before the roads get too bad." Owen nodded, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Good idea. My horse could use the exercise too." They ate quickly, then bundled up against the cold for the journey. Willow's mare was skittish about the patches of ice on the trail, but Owen's steadier gelding led the way, creating a safer path for her to follow. The ride to town took longer than usual with the treacherous conditions, but they arrived before midday, the small settlement of Willow Creek bustling with others similarly intent on winter preparations. At the general store, they separated Owen to inquire about feed prices for the animals, Willow to select fabric for winter sewing projects. She was examining a bolt of warm flannel when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Miss Matthews, what a pleasant surprise." Turning, she found Thomas Barnes, the schoolteacher, smiling warmly at her. His neatly trimmed beard was dusted with snowflakes, his eyes bright with genuine pleasure at seeing her. "Mr. Barnes," she greeted him with a smile, "how are you?" "Well enough, though the children are restless with the change in weather." His eyes moved past her to where Owen stood at the counter, then back to her face with a question in their depths. "I see Mr. Miller is still in the area." "Yes," Willow confirmed, aware of the curiosity in his tone. "He's been helping me prepare the cabin for winter." Thomas nodded, his expression carefully neutral, very neighborly of him. Before Willow could respond, Owen approached, touching his hat respectfully to the schoolteacher. "Barnes," he greeted simply. "Miller." Thomas's reply was equally terse. "I understand you've been making yourself useful at Miss Matthews' property." "Trying to," Owen acknowledged, "though I suspect she'd manage just fine without me." "No doubt," Thomas agreed. "Willow has always been remarkably self-sufficient." The use of her given name wasn't lost on Owen, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, tension crackled between the men like static before a storm. Willow cleared her throat. "Mr. Barnes was just telling me about his students," she said, deliberately steering the conversation to safer ground. Thomas accepted the redirection gracefully. "Yes, they're presenting a Christmas pageant next month. You would be most welcome to attend, Miss Matthews." His eyes included Owen in the invitation with obvious reluctance. "Both of you, of course." "That's very kind," Willow replied. "Weather permitting, we'd be delighted." They chatted for a few more minutes about town affairs before Thomas excused himself, citing papers to grade. As he departed, he paused, turning back to Willow. "My offer still stands, you know," he said quietly, though not so quietly that Owen couldn't hear. "Should you ever reconsider?" With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving a weighted silence in his wake. His offer. Owen inquired as they continued their shopping, his tone stupidly casual. Willow considered deflecting the question but opted for honesty. "Thomas asked me to marry him last spring." Owen's hands stilled on the sack of flour he had been examining. "I see." "I declined," she reminded him, though he hadn't asked. "Yes." His voice was carefully neutral. "You mentioned that before." They completed their purchases in relative silence, loading the supplies onto their horses for the journey home. As they rode out of town, snowflakes began to fall again, gentle at first but gradually increasing in intensity. "Storm's coming back," Owen observed, glancing at the darkening sky. "We should hurry." They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the thickening snow made the trail increasingly treacherous. By the time they reached the halfway point to the cabin, visibility had dropped significantly, the wind driving snow into their faces. "This is getting dangerous," Owen called over the rising wind. "We need to find shelter until it passes." Willow nodded, squinting against the blinding white. "There's a trapper's lean-to about a quarter-mile ahead, just off the trail. It's not much, but it would be better than nothing." Owen gestured for her to lead the way, following close behind as she guided her nervous mare off the main trail and into the relative shelter of the trees. The lean-to was indeed primitive, little more than a slanted roof supported by poles, with a rough stone fire pit in front, but it offered some protection from the driving snow. They tethered the horses in the lee of the structure, where they would have some shelter from the wind, then gathered what dry wood they could find beneath the nearby pines. Owen's hands were quick and sure as he built a small fire, coaxing flames from the sparse tinder despite the damp conditions. Willow huddled close to the growing warmth, pulling her coat tighter around herself as the wind howled through the trees. "I didn't expect it to worsen so quickly," she said, watching the snow accumulate at an alarming rate. "We might be here for some time." Owen nodded grimly, adding another branch to the fire. "At least we have the supplies, and the horses can manage the snow once the wind dies down." They sat side by side, sharing the meager shelter and the warmth of the small fire. As the afternoon wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, Owen unpacked some of their provisions, jerky and hardtack, not the most appetizing meal but sufficient to ward off hunger. Like our childhood adventures, Willow observed, accepting a piece of jerky. Remember when we got caught in that summer cloudburst and had to shelter in the old Miller barn? Owen smiled at the memory. Your mother was furious when you came home soaked to the skin and covered in hay. She was convinced we'd catch our deaths, Willow recalled. Made us drink that terrible willow bark tea, which ironically you could probably make better than anyone now, Owen commented, nodding toward her bundle of herb-gathering supplies. Probably, she agreed with a small smile, though I prefer honey in mine. The shared memory eased some of the tension that had lingered since their encounter with Thomas in town. As the short winter day began to fade into early darkness, they huddled closer to the fire, the temperature dropping rapidly with the setting sun. "You're shivering," Owen observed, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine," Willow insisted, though her teeth threatened to chatter with cold. Without asking permission, Owen moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and drawing her back against his chest. "Body heat," he explained simply. "No sense in freezing when there's a practical solution." The practical solution sent warmth flooding through Willow that had nothing to do with actual temperature. The solid strength of Owen's chest against her back, the familiar scent of him mingling with wood smoke, stirred memories best left undisturbed. "Owen," she began, uncertain what she even wanted to say. "Just staying warm, Willow," he assured her quietly. "Nothing more unless you want it to be." The simple statement, offering warmth without expectation, somehow made her heart ache more than any passionate declaration could have. She found herself relaxing into his embrace, allowing herself to accept the comfort he offered. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, the fire casting flickering shadows against the snow-laden trees. Outside their small shelter, the storm continued to rage, but within the circle of Owen's arms, Willow found herself strangely at peace. "I miss this," Owen said softly, his breath warm against her hair. "Not just you, though God knows I missed you every day, but this, the simplicity of being together, facing whatever comes." Willow closed her eyes, allowing herself to acknowledge the truth in his words. "I missed it too," she admitted quietly. "Even when I was angriest at you, I missed knowing you were there, sharing the world with me." His arms tightened fractionally around her, a silent acknowledgement of her confession. They remained that way as the night deepened around them, together in a way they hadn't been for 8 long years, yet still separated by the ghosts of broken promises and unspoken regrets. Eventually, the wind began to die down, the snowfall lightening from a blizzard to gentle flakes that drifted lazily through the darkness. "Storms passing," Owen observed, his voice a rumble she could feel against her back. "But it's too dark to travel safely now. We should wait for first light." Willow nodded, reluctant to leave the warmth they had created, but aware of the propriety they were already stretching thin. "You should rest," she suggested. "I can keep watch for a while." "I'm fine," he assured her. "Not tired yet, but you sleep if you can." Despite her intention to remain awake, the warmth and the rhythmic sound of Owen's heartbeat against her ear eventually lulled Willow into a light doze. She dreamed of summer days and promises whispered beneath starlight, of a future once imagined and long abandoned. When she woke, pale dawn was filtering through the trees, illuminating a world transformed by snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape of untouched white. Owen was still behind her, his breathing deep and even in sleep, one arm still protectively around her waist. For a moment, Willow allowed herself to imagine waking this way every morning, secure in his embrace, facing each new day together. The yearning that accompanied the thought was almost painful in its intensity. Carefully, she extracted herself from his arms, moving to check on the horses. The animals had weathered the night well enough, though they were clearly eager to return to the warmth of their stable. When she returned to the lean-to, Owen was awake, rebuilding the fire to warm them before their journey home. "The trail should be passable once the sun rises fully," he said, looking up at her approach. "Though we'll need to take it slow," Willow nodded, suddenly self-conscious in the clear light of morning. The intimacy of the night before seemed both real and dreamlike, a moment out of time that now had to be reconciled with the practical reality of their situation. "About last night," she began awkwardly. "We stayed warm," Owen said simply, understanding in his eyes. Nothing to apologize for or explain away. The generosity of his response, offering her a way to retreat without embarrassment, touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." They shared a simple breakfast from their supplies, then saddled the horses for the journey home. The snow had drifted in places, making the trail challenging, but both riders were experienced enough to navigate the conditions safely. When they finally crested the last hill and the cabin came into view, Willow felt a surge of relief mixed with an odd reluctance. Their night in the lean-to had created a bubble of intimacy, a space where the complexities of their past could momentarily be set aside. Returning home meant returning to reality, to the questions that still remained unanswered between them. Owen seemed to sense her thoughts. As they dismounted in front of the cabin, he touched her arm gently. "Willow," he said, his voice low and serious, "last night changed nothing if you don't want it to. I made you a promise when I returned that I would respect your wishes, whatever they might be." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart twist in her chest. "And if I don't know what I wish," she asked honestly, a small, sad smile touched his lips, "then I'll wait until you do." The simplicity of his answer, the patient understanding it conveyed, threatened to unravel the careful restraint she had maintained since his return. Before she could respond, a movement at the edge of the property caught her attention. A figure was approaching on horseback, struggling through the deep snow. As they drew closer, Willow recognized Thomas Barnes, his face set in lines of concern. "Miss Matthews," he called as he reached them. "Thank heaven you're safe. When you didn't return to town yesterday, I feared the worst with the storm." "We found shelter," Willow explained, aware of Owen's sudden stillness beside her. "But thank you for your concern, Mr. Barnes." Thomas dismounted, his relief evident as he took in her unharmed state. "When I saw the smoke from your chimney just now, I nearly wept with relief," he admitted. "The thought of you out in that blizzard." His genuine concern touched Willow, even as she felt Owen withdraw emotionally beside her. "It was uncomfortable, but we managed well enough," she assured Thomas. "You shouldn't have risked the journey yourself in these conditions." "For you," Thomas's gaze was warm with affection, "I would risk far more." The declaration hung in the air, impossible to misinterpret. Owen cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "I'll see to the horses," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Barnes, you're welcome to warm yourself inside before heading back." Without waiting for a response, he led both their mounts toward the small stable, his back straight and his shoulders set in a line that Willow recognized as carefully controlled emotion. Thomas watched him go, then turned back to Willow with a question in his eyes. "Owen Miller," he began cautiously, "is there something I should know?" Willow hesitated, unsure how to answer when she herself didn't know what existed between her and Owen. "It's complicated," she said finally. Thomas nodded, understanding in his gaze. "History often is." He glanced toward the stable, then back to her. "But history isn't destiny, Willow. We choose our own paths forward." The gentle reminder carried no judgment, only genuine care for her well-being. Thomas had always been kind that way, patient and thoughtful, never pushing beyond what she was ready to give. "Would you like to come in for tea?" she offered, feeling it was the least she could do after his concern for her safety. "Thank you, but no," he declined with a small smile. "I should get back to town while the daylight holds. The children will be waiting for their lessons." He hesitated, then added, "Just remember what I said about choosing your own path." With a tip of his hat, he remounted his horse and turned back toward town, leaving Willow standing in the snow with his words echoing in her mind. When Owen returned from the stable, his expression was carefully composed. "Everything's settled with the horses," he reported. "And I've brought in your supplies." "Thank you," Willow said, studying his face for signs of what he might be feeling. "Owen, about Thomas, you don't owe me any explanations," he interrupted gently. "Barnes is a good man. I can see why he cares for you." The simple acknowledgement, free from jealousy or possessiveness, caught Willow off guard. The boy she had known would have bristled at another man's attention, perhaps even confronted Thomas directly. This mature acceptance was yet another sign of how Owen had changed during their years apart. "He is a good man," she agreed, "but he's not." She faltered, uncertain how to complete the thought. "Not what?" Owen prompted quietly. Willow met his eyes directly. "Not you," she said simply. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Owen's expression softened, hope kindling in his gaze before he carefully banked it. "That doesn't necessarily mean I'm the right choice either," he said with painful honesty. "I hurt you once, Willow. I wouldn't blame you for not risking that again." His willingness to acknowledge the pain he had caused, to put her well-being above his own desires, moved Willow deeply. This was not the impulsive boy who had left with grand promises, but a man who understood the weight of his actions and their consequences. "I think," she said slowly, "that we both need time to understand what we want now, not what we wanted 8 years ago." Owen nodded, acceptance in his gaze. "I can give you that time, Willow, as much as you need." The promise in his words warmed her more than any fire could have. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood together in the snow-covered yard, the cabin behind them a silent witness to their tentative steps toward reconciliation. Above them, the sky had cleared to a brilliant blue, the storm's fury replaced by a calm that mirrored the newfound peace between them. "We should go inside," Willow suggested, "before we catch our death standing out here in the cold." Owen smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. "Lead the way," he said, gesturing toward the cabin that had once been their shared dream and might, perhaps, become their shared future. As winter settled fully over the valley, Willow and Owen established a new routine. He continued to sleep in the shed, now properly insulated against the cold, while they shared meals and work during the daylight hours. The heavy snows kept them largely isolated from town, creating a private world where they could rediscover each other without outside pressures or expectations. They passed the long evenings by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from Willow's small collection of books, sometimes simply talking. Owen told her of his travels after the war, the mining camps of Colorado, the cattle ranches of Wyoming, the frontier towns where he had sought oblivion in whiskey before finding purpose with Dr. Harrison. In turn, Willow shared stories of her years alone, the challenges of establishing her herb business, the friendships she had formed in town, the quiet satisfaction she had found in her independence. Gradually, the 8 years that had separated them were bridged by understanding, each piece of shared history drawing them closer together. As Christmas approached, the weather cleared enough for a journey into town. They made the trip together, Willow to sell her remedies and preserved goods, Owen to purchase supplies and inquire about work opportunities for the spring. The town was festively decorated, pine boughs and red ribbons adorning the storefronts, children's paper snowflakes pasted in schoolhouse windows. Willow found herself swept up in the holiday spirit, purchasing small gifts for friends and selecting a special blend of tea for her mother's Christmas package. At the general store, she lingered over a display of men's gloves, thinking of Owen's hands chapped from work in the cold. She was examining a sturdy pair lined with rabbit fur when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Those would make a fine gift for someone special. Turning, she found Thomas Barnes watching her with a knowing smile. "Mr. Barnes," she greeted him. "How are your students coming along with their Christmas pageant?" "Remarkably well," he replied. "We're performing tomorrow evening at the church. I do hope you and Mr. Miller will attend." The genuine invitation, free from jealousy or resentment, reminded Willow why she had always valued Thomas's friendship. "We'd be delighted," she assured him. Thomas nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "I'm glad to see you looking so well, Willow." "Happier than you've been in some time, I think." The perceptive observation brought a flush to her cheeks. "Perhaps I am," she admitted. "Good." He touched his hat in farewell. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, you know, happiness whether or not I was part of it." As he moved away to greet other townspeople, Willow found herself reflecting on his generosity of spirit. Thomas had offered her security, companionship, and genuine affection, all valuable things, and more than many women could hope for in a marriage. Yet she had declined, holding out for something she had once known and lost, the kind of love that changed the very rhythm of your heart. She purchased the gloves and tucked them into her basket, a secret smile playing at her lips as she imagined Owen's surprised pleasure on Christmas morning. They attended the children's pageant the following evening, sitting among the townsfolk in the small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. The children performed their nativity story with earnest enthusiasm, occasionally forgetting lines or stepping on each other's toes, much to the audience's affectionate amusement. As they walked home afterward, stars glittering in the clear, cold sky above them, Willow found herself humming one of the Christmas carols from the service. Owen listened silently for a moment, then joined in, his deep voice blending with hers in the still night air. The simple harmony of their voices struck Willow as a metaphor for what was growing between them, not the passionate, sometimes tumultuous love of their youth, but something deeper and more enduring. A partnership built on mutual respect and understanding, where each complemented the other without diminishing individual strength. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight sparkling on the pristine snow that blanketed the valley. Willow rose early to prepare a special breakfast, her heart light with anticipation for the day ahead. Owen arrived at the cabin door with his arms full of pine boughs, his face flushed from cold and exertion. "Thought we might bring a bit of Christmas inside," he explained, shaking snow from his boots before entering. Together, they arranged the fragrant greenery around the cabin, the scent of pine filling the small space with holiday spirit. Willow set out the special breakfast she had prepared: fresh biscuits, preserved fruit, and precious store-bought coffee she had been saving for the occasion. After they had eaten, Owen reached into his coat pocket and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas, Willow," he said, extending it toward her with a hint of nervousness in his eyes. Willow unwrapped the gift carefully, gasping softly when she revealed what lay within: a delicate silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a wishing stone, complete with a tiny hole through its center. "Owen," she breathed, lifting the necklace to catch the light. "It's beautiful." "I had it made in town," he explained. "Gave the silversmith your river stone as a model. I thought you might like something to remind you that wishes can still come true, even the ones that seem impossible." The thoughtfulness of the gift, the way it honored both their shared past and the possibility of a future together, brought tears to Willow's eyes. "Would you help me put it on?" she asked, turning so he could fasten the clasp behind her neck. Owen's fingers were gentle as they brushed against her skin, the small contact sending warmth spreading through her despite the winter chill. "I have something for you too," she said when the necklace was secure. She retrieved her own package from its hiding place and handed it to him shyly. Owen unwrapped the gloves, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "These are perfect," he said, trying them on and flexing his fingers in the soft lining. "My old ones were nearly worn through." "I noticed," Willow admitted. "Your hands have been chapped from the cold." The fact that she had observed this small detail, had chosen a gift that was both practical and thoughtful, seemed to touch Owen deeply. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than elaborate expressions of gratitude. They spent the day in quiet celebration, sharing memories of Christmases past and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together without the usual work that filled their days. As evening approached, Owen built up the fire against the gathering cold, and Willow prepared a simple but special supper. They ate by firelight, the cabin warm and fragrant with pine, more comfortable in each other's presence than they had been since his return. When the meal was done, they lingered by the fire, reluctant to end the perfect day. "I have a confession to make," Owen said finally, his voice soft in the quiet room. "I've been keeping something from you." Willow felt a flutter of apprehension. "What is it?" "I've been saving," he explained, "from odd jobs in town and some money I brought with me from Wyoming. Enough to buy a small place of my own come spring. The revelation caught Willow off guard. She had grown so accustomed to Owen's presence in her daily life that the thought of him establishing a separate homestead hadn't occurred to her. "I see," she said carefully, uncertain how to respond. "That's practical." Owen studied her face in the firelight. "It would be nearby," he continued. "The old Preston place, about 2 miles downriver. It needs work, but the foundation is sound." Willow nodded, trying to imagine Owen living so close yet separate from her. The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. "Unless," Owen added softly, "you might consider another arrangement." Her eyes flew to his, finding them serious and intent in the flickering light. "What arrangement?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen set aside his cup and leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "The one we planned 8 years ago, Willow, the life we dreamed of building together." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife." The proposal hung in the air between them, both familiar and entirely new. This was not the impetuous declaration of a boy in love, but the considered offer of a man who understood the weight of commitment. "Owen," she began, her heart racing in her chest. You don't need to answer now," he interjected gently. "I know I'm asking a lot after everything that's happened. Just think about it, please." The sincerity in his eyes, the careful restraint in his voice, moved Willow deeply. This was not manipulation or pressure, but an honest request for her to consider a shared future. "I will," she promised. "Think about it, I mean." Relief softened his features. "That's all I ask." He rose from his chair, reaching for his coat. "I should head back to the shed." "Let you have some time to yourself." At the door he paused, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Merry Christmas, Willow," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Owen," she replied, her fingers unconsciously touching the wishing stone pendant at her throat. After he had gone, Willow sat by the fire for a long time, her mind turning over his proposal and the implications of her answer. Marriage to Owen would mean entrusting her heart once more to the man who had once broken it. Yet the Owen who stood before her now was not the same person who had left 8 years ago. He had been shaped by experience, tempered by hardship, deepened by regret, and she was not the same girl he had left behind. She had built a life for herself, proven her own strength and resilience. She approached love now not from desperate need, but from confident choice. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around her, Willow found her thoughts drifting to the wishing stone, the original that still sat on her shelf, and the silver replica that now hung around her neck. All those years ago, she had whispered her deepest desire through the stone's natural opening. A life with Owen, children, a home filled with love. Now that wish was once again within reach, if she had the courage to grasp it. The days following Christmas passed in a curious mixture of normality and heightened awareness. They continued their daily routines, tending animals, maintaining the cabin against winter's assault, sharing meals and conversation, yet an undercurrent of anticipation ran beneath every interaction. Owen was true to his word, never pressing for an answer to his proposal, but allowing Willow the space to consider her response carefully. His patience, his willingness to wait for her decision without manipulation or pressure, only confirmed for Willow how much he had matured during their years apart. As the old year waned and the new one approached, the weather turned bitterly cold. They awoke one morning to find the creek frozen solid and frost patterns etching elaborate designs on every window pane. "Coldest spell I've seen in years," Owen observed as they shared breakfast in the cabin. "Good thing we stacked plenty of firewood," Willow nodded, adding honey to her tea. "The animals will need extra feed to keep warm, and we should check the roof. This much snow could strain the beams." They worked together through the short winter day, ensuring the livestock were well tended and the cabin secure against the brutal cold. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped even further, the air so frigid it hurt to breathe. "The shed will be like an icebox tonight," Willow said as they stomped snow from their boots on the porch. "You should stay in the cabin." Owen looked at her carefully, assessing her invitation. "I can manage in the shed," he said, though his reddened face and chapped lips belied his words. "Don't want to impose." It's not an imposition, she insisted. It's common sense. No one should be in an uninsulated building on a night like this. After a moment's hesitation, Owen nodded. Thank you. They prepared a simple supper together, then settled by the fire for the evening. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and driving snow against the windows in stinging pellets. Good night to be indoors, Owen commented, adding another log to the fire. Reminds me of that blizzard in '69, remember? When the whole town was snowbound for nearly a week. Willow smiled at the memory. My father had to dig a tunnel from our door to the woodpile. And I walked 3 miles through drifts up to my waist just to make sure you were all right, Owen recalled, his eyes warm with remembrance. Mother thought you'd lost your mind, Willow laughed softly, but I was so happy to see you. The shared memory created a bridge between past and present, reminding them both of the depth of feeling that had existed between them even then. As the evening progressed and the cabin grew quieter, that awareness deepened, creating an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical proximity. When it came time to sleep, Willow prepared the chair by the fire for Owen as she had on the nights he had stayed before. But as she arranged the blanket and pillow, she found herself hesitating. Owen, she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. It's going to get colder still before morning. He looked at her questioningly, waiting for her to continue. The bed is warmer, she said finally. We could share it just for warmth, she added quickly. Like in the lean-to during the storm. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by careful consideration. Are you certain? The simple question, respectful of her boundaries even in this moment, confirmed what Willow already knew in her heart. This was a man she could trust not just with her body, but with her future. Yes, she said softly. I'm certain. They prepared for bed with a shy formality, Owen turning his back as Willow changed behind her screen, both of them maintaining a careful propriety despite the intimacy of what they had agreed to. When they finally slipped beneath the quilt together, they lay side by side, not touching, an invisible barrier between them. Good night, Willow, Owen said quietly, his voice a rumble in the darkness. Good night, she whispered back. For a long while, they remained that way, acutely aware of each other's presence but separated by the last vestiges of caution. Then, as the cabin creaked and settled in the deepening cold, Willow found herself moving closer to the warmth of Owen's body. He responded instinctively, his arm lifting to make space for her against his side. She settled against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as naturally as if they had slept this way for years. Better, he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Yes, she replied, surprised by how true it was. The rightness of being in his arms again after so many years apart filled her with a peace she had almost forgotten was possible. As sleep began to claim her, Willow felt Owen's lips brush her forehead in the lightest of kisses. I love you, he whispered, the words barely audible. I never stopped. She wanted to respond to tell him that despite everything, her heart had remained his as well. But the words caught in her throat, held back by the last tendrils of fear that still wound around her heart. Instead, she pressed closer to him, hoping he would understand what she wasn't yet ready to say aloud. His arm tightened around her in response, a silent acknowledgement of what remained unspoken between them. They slept that way through the night, two people who had once been torn apart by circumstance, now reunited against winter's assault. And when morning came, bringing with it a new year and the promise of beginnings, Willow woke to find Owen watching her, his eyes soft with an emotion that made her heart swell in her chest. Happy New Year, he said quietly. She reached up to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the contours that had grown more defined with age. Happy New Year, Owen. In that moment, in the quiet sanctuary of the cabin they had once dreamed of sharing, Willow found her answer. It rose within her with the certainty of the sun climbing above the eastern mountains, illuminating not just the snow-covered valley but the path that stretched before them. Yes, she said simply. Owen's brow furrowed in momentary confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. Yes. He repeated, hope and caution warring in his voice. Yes, I'll marry you, Willow clarified, her heart lightening with each word. Yes, I'll build a life with you here in the cabin we dreamed of as children. Joy transformed Owen's face, years falling away as he gathered her closer. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I need you to be sure, Willow. This isn't a decision to make lightly. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him, finding the truth of it in her heart. These past months have shown me who you are now, not just who you were then. And I love the man you've become, Owen. I love your patience and your honesty, your willingness to work for what matters to you. She touched the wishing stone pendant at her throat. I love that you never stopped believing in our dream, even when it seemed impossible. Owen's eyes shone with unshed tears as he cradled her face in his hands. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of your faith in me, he promised. Every day, Willow. I know, she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with increasing passion as 8 years of separation dissolved in the heat of their reunion. When they finally drew apart, breathless and flushed, Owen rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked simply. Willow smiled, her heart fuller than she had thought possible. Spring, she decided, when the wildflowers bloom again in the meadow, we can be married there beneath the old cottonwood tree. Where we first kissed, Owen remembered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Perfect. They rose eventually, the practical demands of the day calling them back to reality. But something fundamental had shifted between them, a barrier finally breached, a wound at last beginning to heal. As they went about their morning tasks, Willow found herself stealing glances at Owen, the man who would soon be her husband. The boy who had once captured her heart returned to her, as if guided by some invisible hand of fate. Later, as they stood together on the porch watching the sun transform the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds, Owen slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close against the winter chill. You remember what we used to say about this place? He asked softly. When we first found it, Willow nodded, the memory clear despite the passing years. That it was waiting for us, that it would be our home someday. It was, Owen affirmed, his gaze sweeping over the cabin they had discovered as children and had now, against all odds, made their own. It just took us longer to find our way back than we expected. Willow leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Some journeys are like that, she observed. Longer and harder than we anticipate, but perhaps that makes the homecoming all the sweeter. Owen's arms tightened around her, his chin resting on the crown of her head. Welcome home, Willow, he whispered. And standing there in the brilliant winter sunshine, wrapped in the arms of the man who had journeyed through darkness to find his way back to her, Willow finally understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. Home wasn't a cabin in the wilderness or a plot of land staked by human hands. Home was the perfect alignment of two hearts that, despite time and distance and the wounds inflicted by both, had somehow found their way back to each other. Welcome home, Owen, she whispered back and felt his smile against her hair. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the valley as January gave way to February, and February to March. With each passing day, the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth beginning to penetrate the snow-laden landscape. Willow and Owen settled into a new rhythm, no longer separated by the shed's walls but sharing the cabin as they prepared for both spring's arrival and their upcoming wedding. They worked side by side during the days, tending to animals and making plans for expanded gardens and perhaps a new room added to the cabin. At night, they shared the narrow bed, finding in each other's arms a comfort and joy that made the bitter cold outside seem distant and unimportant. As the snow began to melt, revealing patches of soggy earth beneath, they made trips into town to share their news and make arrangements for the ceremony. The townspeople received their announcement with varying degrees of surprise and delight, though none seemed truly shocked that the childhood sweethearts had found their way back to each other. Always knew you two were meant for each other, Mrs. Hollister declared when they visited her small bakery to order bread for the wedding celebration. Even when you were just children, following each other around like shadows. Thomas Barnes offered his sincere congratulations when they encountered him outside the schoolhouse, his eyes warm with genuine happiness for Willow. "He's a fortunate man," Thomas told Owen, extending his hand. "Take good care of her." "I intend to," Owen promised, accepting the handshake with respect, as April arrived, bringing with it the first tentative wildflowers pushing through the remaining snow. Preparations for the wedding intensified. Willow ordered fabric for a new dress, and Owen rode to the next town over to purchase a proper suit. They sent a letter to Willow's mother in Virginia, inviting her to come early enough to help with the final arrangements. The response arrived faster than expected, carried by the stagecoach driver who made a special detour to deliver it to their cabin. Willow's mother not only accepted the invitation, but expressed her delight at the match, writing that she had always had a soft spot for that Miller boy, and was pleased that he had finally come to his senses and claimed the best girl in the territory. "Your mother hasn't changed," Owen observed with a smile after reading the letter. "Still speaks her mind without reservation. She'll have plenty to say to you when she arrives," Willow warned him, though her eyes danced with amusement. 8 years of absence to account for. "I'll face her reckoning gladly," Owen declared. "Small price to pay for her blessing." As May approached, the valley transformed. Snow retreated to the highest peaks, wildflowers carpeted the meadows in waves of color, and the creek ran full and clear with snowmelt from the mountains. The old cottonwood tree beside the cabin, under which they had shared their first kiss as teenagers, burst into a canopy of fresh green leaves. Willow's mother arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, stepping down from the stagecoach with the energy of a woman half her age despite the long journey. She embraced her daughter fiercely, then turned to Owen with narrowed eyes. "Young man," she began sternly, "you have some explaining to do." Owen nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam, as much or as little as you'd like to hear, Mrs." Matthews studied him for a long moment, noting the respectful patience in his stance, the sincere regret in his eyes. Finally, she nodded once. "We'll start with you carrying my bags to the cabin. The rest can wait until I've had a cup of tea." The reckoning, when it came, was thorough but not unkind. Mrs. Matthews listened to Owen's explanation of his absence, the mistaken belief that Willow had perished in the fire, his years of grief and self-destruction, and finally, his journey back to the woman he had never stopped loving. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, her shrewd eyes assessing him. "You hurt my daughter deeply," she said finally. "That's not something easily forgiven or forgotten." "I know," Owen acknowledged, meeting her gaze steadily. "I don't expect either forgiveness or forgetfulness. Just the chance to spend the rest of my life making her happy." Mrs. Matthews nodded slowly. "Well, that's a start," she turned to Willow. "And you, my dear, you're certain this is what you want?" Willow reached for Owen's hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture more eloquent than words. "I am, Mother, more certain than I've ever been." "Then that's good enough for me," Mrs. Matthews declared, her stern expression softening into a smile. "Now let's talk about this wedding. There's much to be done and precious little time to do it." The final days before the ceremony passed in a flurry of activity. The cabin was cleaned until it gleamed, new curtains were hung at the windows, and preparations were made for the modest celebration that would follow the vows. Owen moved temporarily back to the shed to honor tradition, though both he and Willow found they slept poorly without the other's presence. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their union. Wildflowers nodded in a gentle breeze, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of spring blossoms. Beneath the cottonwood tree, Owen waited with the minister from town, his new suit slightly stiff but his face alight with joy and anticipation. Townspeople and neighbors gathered in a semicircle, dressed in their Sunday best, murmuring appreciatively as Willow emerged from the cabin on her mother's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, the cream-colored fabric complementing her sun-warmed skin and dark hair, which hung loose around her shoulders adorned with a crown of wildflowers. As she walked toward him across the meadow, Owen felt his heart swell almost painfully in his chest. This was the moment he had dreamed of during those long, dark years of separation, Willow coming to him not out of youthful impulse, but with the deliberate choice of a woman who knew her own mind and heart. When she reached him beneath the cottonwood's spreading branches, he took her hands in his, unable to speak for a moment as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "You came back to me," Willow whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Always," Owen promised. "In this life and whatever comes after." The ceremony itself was brief but deeply meaningful, their vows exchanged in voices that carried clearly to the assembled guests. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen gathered Willow in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and reverence. Cheers erupted from the guests, followed by music as a fiddler from town struck up a lively tune. The celebration continued through the afternoon and into evening, with food and drink and dancing beneath the stars that had witnessed their first promises to each other so many years before. As the night deepened and the last guests departed, Owen and Willow stood together on the porch of their cabin, watching lantern lights bobbing away down the trail toward town. "Happy, Mrs. Miller?" Owen asked softly, his arm around her waist. Willow leaned into his embrace, her head finding its place against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "And you, Mr. Miller?" "Beyond words," he replied, turning to face her fully. "But perhaps I can show you instead." He swept her into his arms then, carrying her across the threshold of the cabin that had once been their childhood dream and was now, at last, their shared reality. Inside, Mrs. Matthews had prepared the room for them, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in simple jars on every surface. As Owen set Willow gently on her feet, she reached for the silver wishing stone that still hung around her neck. "Do you think wishes really do come true?" she asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. Owen covered her hand with his own, feeling the small pendant between their palms. "I think they do," he said seriously. "But not always in the ways we expect. Sometimes the path is longer and harder than we could imagine. But the destination is worth the journey," Willow finished for him, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "Every step," Owen agreed, gathering her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky outside their window, bearing silent witness to wishes finally fulfilled and promises at last redeemed. 1 year later, the summer sun beat down on Willow's back as she knelt in the garden, harvesting the first ripe tomatoes of the season. The expanded plot now included not just vegetables and herbs, but flowers that attracted bees to the new beehives Owen had constructed in the spring. Their first year of marriage had brought changes to the cabin and the surrounding property. A new room had been added, its walls now awaiting the arrival of the cradle Owen was crafting in the workshop he had built beside the stable. The creek had been partially diverted to create a small pond where ducks now nested, and a proper fence enclosed a pasture where 2 horses and a milk cow grazed contentedly. Willow sat back on her heels, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen where their child grew. The baby was due with the first snow, according to the midwife in town, a winter child to complement their spring wedding. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the trail, where Owen appeared astride his dun gelding, returning from a trip to town for supplies. His face lit with a smile when he saw her, and he raised his hand in greeting before dismounting near the stable. Willow rose carefully, brushing soil from her apron and gathering her basket of tomatoes. By the time she reached the cabin, Owen was unloading supplies from his saddlebags, his movements efficient despite the day's heat. "Any mail?" she asked, setting her basket on the porch. Owen nodded, producing several letters from his shirt pocket. "One from your mother and one from Dr. Harrison in Wyoming." He handed them to her with a smile, and the fabric you ordered for the baby's blankets arrived. Willow took the letters, anticipation warming her at the thought of news from both her mother and the doctor who had helped Owen find his way back to her. Was it very hot in town? "Scorching," Owen confirmed, wiping sweat from his brow, "but the creek will be cool. Thought we might take a swim after supper if you're feeling up to it." The suggestion was tempting. The cool water would be a welcome relief from the summer heat. That sounds perfect, she agreed. They moved inside to escape the afternoon sun, Owen insisting that Willow rest while he prepared a simple meal. As she sat in the rocking chair he had made for her birthday, Willow opened her mother's letter first, smiling at the familiar handwriting that covered the pages with news from Virginia and excited questions about the coming grandchild, Dr. Harrison's letter was briefer but equally warm, expressing his pleasure at hearing of their marriage and the impending addition to their family. "It does my old heart good," he wrote, "to know that the troubled young man who arrived at my door 3 years ago has found his way to happiness. Remember what I told you, Owen, healing happens in the living, in the daily choice to be better than you were before. From what you've written, it seems you and your Willow are healing each other quite admirably." Willow looked up from the letter to find Owen watching her, a question in his eyes. "Good news?" he asked. "The best," she confirmed, holding out the letter for him to read. "Dr. Harrison sends his congratulations and wisdom as usual." Owen read the doctor's words, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "He's right," he said finally, looking up at Willow. "About the healing. Every day with you mends something in me I didn't even know was broken." The simple sincerity of his words touched Willow deeply. She held out her hand to him, and he came to kneel beside her chair, his palm covering hers over the swell of their growing child. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to you," she told him softly. "Something you found or lost through chance or fate, but now I understand it's something you build day by day, choice by choice." She laced her fingers through his. "We're building it together, Owen. Just like we built this cabin. Log by log," he agreed, leaning forward to kiss her gently, "and it will stand for generations." As the summer evening settled around them, golden light spilling through the windows of the cabin they had dreamed of as children and created as adults, Willow felt a profound sense of rightness. The circle that had begun with 2 young hearts making promises beneath a cottonwood tree had at last been completed, strengthened by separation, tempered by pain, but ultimately unbroken. Later, as they swam in the creek's cool waters and watched fireflies begin their nightly dance above the meadow, Willow caught Owen looking at her with an expression of wonder. "What is it?" she asked, floating beside him in the gentle current. "Just thinking about that day I rode back here," he replied, reaching out to brush a wet strand of hair from her face. "How afraid I was that you'd send me away, how certain I was that I'd lost my chance for this life we're building." "I nearly did send you away," she admitted. "My pride wanted to." "But your heart didn't," he finished for her, drawing her closer in the buoyant water. "No," she agreed softly. "My heart remembered what my mind tried to forget, that some bonds can't be broken, not even by time or distance or hurt. I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret that decision," Owen promised, his eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. "I know," Willow said simply, and in those 2 words lay a lifetime of trust rebuilt, of faith restored, of love that had endured beyond all reasonable expectation. As darkness fell completely and they made their way back to the cabin, hand in hand beneath a canopy of stars, Willow thought of the wishing stone she had kept all those years, the one that now sat on a shelf beside the silver pendant Owen had given her. Perhaps there was magic in it after all, not in the stone itself, but in the power of a wish held faithfully in 2 hearts that, despite everything, had found their way home to each other. In the warmth of their cabin, with the promise of their child growing beneath her heart and the love of her life beside her, Willow knew that some dreams, even those long deferred, were worth every moment of waiting. The cowboy had indeed returned to the cabin they had built as children, and together they were building a life more beautiful than either could have imagined, log by log, day by day, season by season, into a future as vast and promising as the western sky.